Not a bad view. Let me add some music to make it epic. There we go. This is where there was supposed to be some clever line, something unexpected and shocking, so you drop everything and finally start paying attention. But you know what? Forget it. Not today. This world's kind of gone off the rails. Trump wants our resources and the fancy suits, while we're just trying not to be the ones ending up in a suit at a funeral. We just want to survive. You've probably seen that Forbes map, right? The total value of Ukraine's natural resources is estimated at almost $15 trillion. And it leaves me with the same obvious question as one of the characters from Breaking Bad.
Where's my money, bitch?
In this video, you're not just going to hear about it, you'll finally see how Ukraine's resources are actually extracted. Do we really have trillions under our feet? Which rare metals was Trump after? And how will this deal affect every one of us? So right now, subscribe to the PEICHEV channel, don't forget to like this video, and let's go hunt for those trillions. Let's start with Donald Trump, a man who loves breaking the usual rules of the world order. He even changed the pen he uses to sign documents. In the United States, there's a tradition. Presidents use an expensive cross pen, and you almost get the feeling that this was the same kind of pen that once signed the Budapest Memorandum. But Trump said that pen was garbage and switched to a pretty cheap Sharpie. He asked them to make it black and make it look expensive. Those same pens were lying on the table on February 28th in front of the American and Ukrainian presidents. And that day, probably for the first time in our history, we did not just automatically sign everything our partners from across the ocean put in front of us. At that moment, the agreement was still up in the air. Only later did Ukraine and the United States finally sign a deal on Ukrainian rare earth minerals, after additional negotiations and in a very different political context. So what was all that about anyway? All those talks about suits, about us being ungrateful, and what is this actually going to mean for us?
These are high-level diplomatic negotiations. They don't just happen out of nowhere, they're prepared in advance. I'm a business guy, not a diplomat and not a politician, but I've signed plenty of deals in my time. I've been involved in corporate conflicts, and any tough negotiation always starts with preparation. You have to understand who you're meeting with, their psychological profile, what motivates them, how you can win them over, what you can use to your advantage. And most importantly, you need to know what you're walking away with after that meeting. Every meeting like this has a goal, and if you're taking part in it, you're supposed to get something out of it. All of us have a psychological profile. If you're a public figure, people can break down in detail how you react to different things, and they can use that. Those draft agreements we saw online, we can't be sure they were real. Someone leaked them. When you're negotiating at that level, there are strict secrecy and security protocols. Documents like that don't just show up in the media unless someone needs them to get a reaction from different audiences or to put pressure on the people at the table. That first version of the deal really reminded me of the gangster-style 90s. I'm from Donetsk. Back then, one gang would show up at a business trying to rip it apart. Then another gang would come and say, "Look, we'll protect you, but you give us half your business." What guarantees do we get? We'll be your partners. Okay, but what actual guarantees? No, first give us half the business, then we'll talk. I've seen conversations like that with my own eyes, and this whole situation felt very similar.
The agreement with the United States on mining Ukraine's rare earth minerals is no longer just hanging in the air. It has now been signed. But that doesn't mean Ukraine will suddenly become rich. We still need to wake up because the Ukrainian economy is hanging by a thread. So let's take a real look at our resources. Tell us what we're looking at here. And first of all, people always care about one thing, the price. What's the most valuable thing here?
Here you can see some ore samples. Some of these rocks are from Ukraine, some are not. For example, this is our most valuable ore. It's iron ore, so-called jaspilite, an iron-rich quartzite that's mined in Kryvyi Rih. This is one of the main sources of value for our country. It's been mined for about 150 years already, and it'll probably keep being mined for many, many more. We've got a lot of it. This one is an interesting rock, too. It's what's called albite rock. Our uranium deposits are associated with rocks like this. You can't see the uranium here, but this is a typical piece of albite rock.
And what's in that little bag?
And this is gold, Ukrainian gold, from the Kryvyi Rih deposit.
And is there really a lot of gold in Ukraine? Because I've never heard of any large gold mines here.
Ukraine actually has really strong potential when it comes to discovering good gold deposits. But all the areas we know about so far are still underexplored and not fully developed.
Right now, we're heading to the PEICHEV quarry, and these quarries are actually right in the middle of the city. What you're experiencing now is also part of Kryvyi Rih hospitality, because back in the early 90s, a popular phrase appeared, "I'll take you out to the quarry." Let's just say it wasn't exactly about a fun tour. But we don't just take people out there, we also bring them back.
That's a nice, important detail. So back in the 90s, did they actually take people out there a lot?
Anyway, that's all history now. There are lots of quarries. Times used to be tense and people were pretty on edge.
There's not much information about this quarry. As far as I understand, it's the oldest one in Kryvyi Rih.
This quarry has been around since the 1950s, with some periods when work stopped. Back in the day, everything was running here, and the entire truck fleet was made up of Belazi dump trucks. There were so many of them, and they all ran on diesel, that a diesel smog was basically hanging over the quarry. Then the ore they mined over there was brought here, dumped from a height of about 10 meters, and it would just pour down. All that dust was blown around and spread across the city.
For decades, people have argued about whether Americans really landed on the moon. And now we've got Elon Musk, who's obsessed with getting to Mars. He's kind of our famous astronaut, you could say, joking, of course. If that doesn't work out for him, we'd be happy to invite him here. At the very least, we've already got one great location ready for him. There are a lot of myths and fun stories about this place. One I read and really liked is that some of the towers in New York were built using iron ore mined here in Kryvyi Rih.
The ore was mined here in Kryvyi Rih, and the iron was smelted at one of the local plants with steel production. They even made little souvenirs out of it, small pieces of rebar.
Pretty cool, and honestly, a little offensive that I haven't been to New York, but our iron has.
I'm pretty sure that if you dig deeper into it, you'll find Kryvyi Rih steel in all kinds of places around the world.
Now about rare earth materials. Do we have the kind of stuff Trump is after?
This place is the real deal, the foundation. This is iron country.
We'll come back to Kryvyi Rih later so you can really understand the scale of it and how everything works there. As for rare earth materials, yes, Ukraine does have them. The thing is, they still aren't being mined anywhere yet. We're ready to explore and develop them together with American partners in exchange for security guarantees, which Trump so far is openly ignoring.
What does Ukraine actually get out of this? Because if bombs keep falling here, there won't be any investment, not even American. Trump says, we'll have our interest here. Okay, and what of it? The U.S. has already had interests in Ukraine. There are a few American companies already working here, Cargill and others. The war affects all sectors. So when I hear Trump's statements, I have questions. These deals are equally attractive to both America and Ukraine. Before we went on air, we talked about this study we took to the U.S. It's about expanding cooperation between Ukraine and the USA. In it, we explain that we understand American support can't last forever. We get that America's main motivation is based, among other things, on a detailed study done by RAND Corporation, a so-called private U.S. intelligence agency. In 2023, they published a report where they broke down the motivations of all the players in the war in Ukraine. They clearly showed that a Ukrainian defeat is not in America's interest, because if Ukraine loses, Russia moves further into Europe, and the U.S. will have to get much more deeply involved. But a Russian defeat isn't in their interest either, because that could lead to Russia breaking apart and all kinds of unpredictable scenarios with nuclear weapons and so on. Trump's policy is laid out in Mandate for Leadership. It's a kind of book, a policy blueprint, and Ukraine is mentioned there 25 times, and not in a good way, not once in a positive sense. It's all, we need to reduce our influence in Europe, we need to cut spending, we need to do this, we need to do that. Our main enemy is China. And the task set out in that document is to pull Russia away from China. How? By giving up part of Ukraine's interests so that Russia will sign a deal with the US and won't be as closely tied to China as a friend and partner. So in that document, Ukraine is basically described as a resource, a bargaining chip to make a deal and implement the bigger idea, reducing China's influence by weakening its relationship with Russia. But there isn't a single word in that document about critical minerals.
Але в цьому документі жодного слова не було про критичні матеріали.
People often get this wrong, and it looks like both Donald Trump and our President Zelensky made the same mistake by using the term rare earths way too broadly. It's actually a very narrow definition. For anyone who remembers chemistry, from lanthanum to ytterbium, those 15 elements are what we call rare earths. Other metals like titanium or lithium are not rare earths, they're rare metals. We shouldn't mix those things up.
So what are these rare earth metals Trump is talking about? What does he actually mean by that?
Think when Trump talks about it, he actually means all of Ukraine's natural resources. Because if we're talking specifically about rare earths, we don't have that many. Our deposits aren't very large, and the best one is currently on occupied territory. These are very high-tech materials. Rare earths are used in practically every modern industry.
Are almost all of them really mined in China?
Right now, around 80% of the world's rare earths are mined in China. And Europe is heavily dependent on that supply. About 98 to 99% of the rare earths Europe uses come from China. And China, as you can imagine, is not exactly the most reliable partner.
Для Америки це критичний ризик. І Україна для них це вирішення.
For the US, this is a critical risk, and Ukraine is basically a way for them to solve that problem. The key critical materials America is heavily dependent on today are gallium, germanium, and even lithium. We don't produce lithium yet. There are a lot of complications there, PEICHEV, but titanium is a different story. Before Russia's full-scale invasion, almost 100% of U.S. titanium imports came from Ukraine, and we understand what kind of role Ukraine can play in these value chains that create the final products America needs. Titanium isn't just used in rockets. It's a core material for submarine hulls, fighter jets, bombers, and all kinds of military and high-tech equipment. So yes, America needs Ukraine. If this deal doesn't happen, the U.S. will be more dependent on China and Russia for critical minerals. We can already see that Trump really wants to make deals with Russia to be friends, so they're clearly ready to work with Moscow. And Putin has already said, if you don't have a deal with Ukraine, we're ready to give you access to our resources. Yesterday, they were shouting that America is their enemy and all communication should be cut off, and now they're suddenly ready to do business. So, is this deal beneficial for Ukraine or not? In general, yes, because this fund they're talking about would be filled with money earned here in Ukraine, but you can't earn that money without investment. We calculated that for Ukraine to cover even 50% of America's demand for critical materials, the country would need about $20 to $30 billion of investment. And that's not just about profit. It's about building entire value chains that create added value so we can at least cover half of U.S. demand in critical materials. For Ukraine, that's huge money. For the U.S., it's relatively small. So for them, it's an extremely good deal. Ukraine would still learn from it. We're talking about creating several 100,000 jobs directly in the new sectors that would appear, and around them a whole ecosystem would grow. There'd be demand for new skills, new educational programs, service companies, and so on. But there's one more issue. Those American companies are not going to show up in Ukraine until we change the business climate. Right now, Ukraine ranks around 151st in the world on the Economic Freedom Index.
150 місце в світі за індексом економічних свобод.
Якщо сказати по-простому.
If we look at Ukraine's resources, are we actually a super rich country, or is this all a bit blown out of proportion?
It's a bit overhyped, sure, but we really are a very resource-rich country. Ukraine is basically in the top 20 countries in the world when it comes to natural resources. When we were still actively mining, by volume of production, we were around 22nd in the world. And by total value, we were about 32nd, and that was in 2020, when Donbass was already not counted. So if you factor that in, we're definitely in the global top 20.
Логічне питання одразу далі.
So if we're so rich, why are we still so poor?
I think the problem is this. First of all, you know that our constitution and our laws say that Ukraine's mineral resources belong to the Ukrainian people, not the president, not parliament. None of them can just take them and hand them over. Remember how those early conversations with Trump about a deal started? At first it sounded like we're giving something away. No, that's simply not possible. And eventually they came to the right conclusion. We can only work together on this because the Constitution literally forbids just giving it away. But the juiciest deposits have already long been taken under licenses by different companies, private individuals, and so on. And somehow all of that doesn't really trickle down to the people.
Зараз всі говорять.
Right now, everyone is talking about rare earth metals. Some Ukrainians say, great, a deal with the US is good for us. Others say, no, they'll just rob Ukraine. They want $500 billion or something like that. And some people say we don't even have anywhere near $500 billion worth of these materials.
If we talk strictly about rare earth elements, then forget 500 billion. We're not even talking 50 billion or even 5 billion. Like I said, the best deposits are now on occupied territory, and what's left still needs to be properly explored. Because in the last 15 years, geology has received almost no funding. Large-scale regional geological surveys basically haven't been happening. According to Forbes, you've probably seen it online, our natural resources are valued at almost $15 trillion. If you read it carefully, there's a little footnote under those maps they show with references to 3 sources.
Там одне з посилань.
In some of those articles, they even mention you by name.
Those references point exactly to our books.
Тобто це
So was it you who said that Ukraine has 15 trillion in metals?
And I'm the one saying that number is an overestimate. They most likely counted resources, while actual reserves are much smaller, maybe around 5 trillion.
знову ж таки процитую Forbes.
Let me quote Forbes. They give this figure of 15 trillion, and you've said you think it's more like 5 trillion. If we compare that to other European countries, is that a lot or not really?
But if you look at the overall structure of Ukraine's mineral resource base, we're almost certainly number 1 in Europe. Definitely. I honestly can't think of a European country that has more than we do. Globally, of course, there are the United States, China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa. They have more in terms of total reserves. But in Europe, we are absolutely in first place.
We were told to wear old shoes because everything here gets stained red. Even now, if you look at how it all works, that reddish smoke you see, that's not iron ore itself. It's just the mineral hematite. It colors everything red, and the landscape really does look like something from Mars. And it's not just the ground. Even the lakes turn red. I seriously doubt swimming here is a good idea. They look absolutely stunning, and there are even certain types of bacteria living in that water, but the level of mineralization is insane. So personally, I'd rather admire this beauty from a safe distance. You told us, wear some old shoes because Kryvyi Rih will stay with you forever. So how do you even wash off this red color? Is that actually possible? Because everything you have here is red.
That red stuff is a serious stain, which is why I keep saying it stays with you forever. Sometimes the guys work here, then go on vacation. It's summer, They shower every day, they shower here after work too. There's even a sauna at the end of the shift. But a week or two goes by, and if it's hot, you still sometimes see red marks on the bed sheets. The dust is literally coming out through their pores.
You've got really cute dogs here, all red like everything else.
Kryvyi Rih iron ore, that's our trademark.
So the ore itself isn't red?
By the way, that's one of the stereotypes. Most people think ore is the red stuff. The real ore is actually that bluish rock. You can see it where the excavator is working. That's hematite.
So this stuff here isn't actually ore? This red layer we were looking at, that's not what we thought it was?
And this here is just waste rock. So if you grab a piece, put it in your pocket as a souvenir, or hope to sell it, that's not going to work. Right now, we're at about minus 210 meters. You could fit a 7 to 9 story building in here. I've also noticed something interesting. Just being down in the quarry wears you out, even if you're not doing any heavy physical work. Seriously, you can test it on yourself. Spend a couple of hours down here, and when you come back up, you feel exhausted.
I don't know how well the camera can show it, but the scale of this quarry is just unreal. And you're telling me that even by Kryvyi Rih standards, this is actually considered a small quarry.
This is actually a small quarry. It's narrow. And to dig deeper, you have to expand outward. That's how open-pit mines work. But here we're squeezed in by residential buildings, so it stretches along like this. First this quarry, and then, just over that strip of land, there's another one.
It reminded me of how a heart works. The heart keeps pumping blood nonstop. And here these trucks that look like little toys from above just keep moving, hauling rock back and forth. The machines never stand still. The only thing that changes is the driver. Mining here goes on 24/7. No night breaks, no weekends, no holidays. And what's funny is, the equipment behind us is considered small. There are much bigger monsters out there. This stuff here is mini by local standards. Just imagine standing next to the biggest haul truck in the world, a Caterpillar. You're driving a machine like that, and you're telling me your hands are shaking because of the interview. Meanwhile, you're casually moving tons of rock. How many tons can your truck actually carry?
If it's ore, I'd say around 7 to 8 tons. You can even load up to 10.
Is the job tough, or do you actually enjoy it?
I just enjoy it.
What do you like about it the most? The landscape here looks totally Martian.
Inside the excavator, it's easy. I don't even really know how I control it. There was this moment in Mariupol. They asked me, so which joystick does what? I couldn't answer. They said, then how are you going to work? And I still couldn't explain. But then I just sat down and showed them what I can do. Honestly, it's nothing special. Driving a regular car is harder.
Here's another cool part of the work. There was this huge boulder that wouldn't even fit into the excavator bucket. Then a rock breaker rolled up and crushed it like a peanut. Looked almost effortless. I get the feeling the people working here are real fanatics in a good way. I asked one of the guys and he just said, I'm loving it.
First of all, we really do like this work. Second, in Kryvyi Rih, this is all about real working dynasties. It's rarely just first generation.
Their dads and granddads did this too.
Grandfathers, great-grandfathers, fathers all worked at different plants. Because most of the companies here are part of the mining and steel industry, the experience gets passed down. We joke that when a baby is born here and takes their first breath, that air, enriched with iron, goes straight into their DNA.
If we look again at that Forbes map with their rough estimates, you can see the richest regions are Donetsk, Luhansk, and Dnipropetrovsk. And according to Forbes, the main value there doesn't come from rare earths or even iron ore, but from coal. And honestly, it sometimes feels like Russia started the war from this direction purely to get its hands on these resources.
Tea was hardly a decisive factor at the moment of the invasion because Russia is larger than Ukraine and its resource base is much bigger than ours. especially when it comes to rare earth metals everyone is talking about now. According to foreign estimates, Ukraine has around 2.2 million tons of them, while Russia has about 28.7 million tons.
There's a popular idea that all the serious geological surveys were done back in the USSR, and that in independent Ukraine, we've only got scattered bits of that data left.
As for the Soviet geological data, it's not quite the way people imagine it. Back then, reports in the regions of the USSR, in Ukraine, in Krasnoyarsk Krai, and so on, were usually made in several copies. One copy always went to Moscow, but the others stayed on site.
Is it really not the case that Moscow knows more about our resources than we do?
So yes, everything that was discovered and evaluated in Soviet times is in Moscow. But after Ukraine became independent, we stopped sending them any new reports.
We've already figured out that Trump isn't really talking about rare earths. He's interested in critical materials, the ones China basically controls right now. We do have those materials. Here we've got titanium deposits that are already being developed. We've got significant uranium reserves, and in these regions, some of the lithium deposits are already under occupation, and that list could go on. But to get specific numbers, we need investment. Only proper exploration will show how much we really have and how good those reserves are.
If Ukraine loses, just to remind you, the American Enterprise Institute estimates that the U.S. would take a hit of more than $800 billion because it would have to step in and help Europe. Because if Ukraine falls, Europe won't hold. Europe doesn't have the people to fight, it doesn't have the stockpiles of weapons, and opinion polls show that most people there are not ready to go to war. Sure, around 10% say, yes, we'd be willing to take up arms, but that's what they say in peacetime. When helicopters and missiles are flying over your head, that number drops very quickly. We remember World War II. Who really resisted? France, Austria, other countries? No. Most of them raised their hands and said, okay, come on in. The same thing would happen with Russia now. And what then? Since 2009, Russia has been developing its Greater Eurasia project together with China. It's a joint economic space for Asian and European countries that are supposed to move toward technological, economic, and financial integration. And once they eventually switch to a single currency, the US dollar will no longer be the world's reserve currency. America will lose the position it has today. We can already see from current trends that within about 5 years, China's GDP will reach the level of the United States. That's the first part, the global economy. The second part is military power. In 2027, China is scheduled to complete the modernization of its army. Let me remind you, Russia finished rearming its military in 2021. That's when I wrote a long piece saying that a big war was coming because you don't keep a fully rearmed army just standing around with no purpose. So China will finish rearming in 2027, and U.S. think tanks are already writing that the highest risk of a third world war is between 2027 and 2034. And of course, the Americans know all of this.
People keep throwing around this number out of nowhere, 500 billion. So how long would it actually take to make $500 billion from our resources?
It's very hard to say, but it's definitely not 10 or 20 years.
Wait, even longer than that?
Much longer.
Wow.
Back in the Soviet Union, it could take up to 10 years just to go from discovering a deposit to actually bringing it into industrial production. Now we have different technologies, so it would go faster, but we're still talking about years. It's definitely not something you can do in less than a year.
Out of everything Ukraine is already mining, titanium stands out. It's a critical, high-value resource. We have plenty of it, and Ukrainian companies have been supplying it to the US for years. On YouTube, they call Ukraine a titanium country, say we're sitting on huge reserves, even on a titanium piggy bank. How much of that is real and how much is just media hype?
In Europe, Norway and Ukraine are the two countries that mine titanium ore. I might be wrong about the exact spot, but we're somewhere around 6th or 7th place in the world. We're definitely in the top 10. That's not by reserves, that's by ore production. Because reserves are just reserves. They haven't been mined yet, they don't bring any profit. There is actual production, and we really do have two titanium-bearing provinces. One is in Zhytomyr region, and another one is in Dnipropetrovsk region. And now, in Kirovohrad region, industrial titanium ore is already being mined. Around 300,000 tons of titanium dioxide are produced here every year.
I listened to you and now I'm thinking I should open a titanium deposit. How much would that cost? Let's say some investors or business people are watching you right now and thinking, this is actually an interesting topic. Is there some kind of minimum amount you can start with?
You see, here you really have to be specific. What type of deposit it is, how big it is, what its mineral composition is. The larger the deposit, the more profitable it is to develop. That's obvious.
You're using the kind of words again that make it sound like you're trying to talk me out of doing this. Is there some minimum threshold? Let's say I have $1 million. Can you say, okay, with this, you can start doing something? Or is it pointless to even get into this with that kind of money?
I think you have to start from at least $10 million, even for a small one. This is not a simple story. So if the respected President of the United States wants to invest $100 million today and get $200 million back tomorrow, it doesn't work like that. It will take at least a year or two, or even 5. That's why, even now, if you go to the same PEICHEV deposit, you'll just see an empty field, and that's it. There's nothing there. Only the wellheads are still standing from the drilling that was done back in the day.
Shmihal said that Ukraine has the largest lithium reserves in Europe. I've read opinions from other experts who say that the whole story with Ukrainian lithium is a bubble that can be blown up way out of proportion.
No, you definitely shouldn't call it a bubble, of course. But keep in mind what I said earlier. There is still a lot to sort out there. You really have to understand these ore bodies, their scale, the lithium content, and so on. A whole pile of issues. Yes, it's believed that we have a lot of lithium, but I'm afraid these deposits still haven't really been fully explored.
This is Chile, one of the world's leaders in lithium production. These picturesque deserts turn into salt flats. And the most interesting part is these lakes. They're not just beautiful, they can make you rich. You basically just have to collect the lithium from the surface.
When the water dries up, these lithium salts, you see, they're right on the surface. You just take a bulldozer, scrape them up, and haul them away by truck. So the cost of extraction there is very low. Here we have a different type of deposit. These ore bodies lie deep underground, and they would have to be mined using underground methods. Obviously, that will be an order of magnitude, maybe even 2 orders of magnitude more expensive than extracting lithium from those salt lakes.
Another great topic is uranium. I think you understand what I mean. Of course, nuclear power plants. Right now, they're really keeping Ukraine's energy system afloat. We need a lot of nuclear fuel. And here's another paradox. Ukraine has a lot of uranium, but we don't know how to process it ourselves. In this part of the chain, up until 2022, we were dependent on Russia. Now the situation is improving. We have a strong partner, the American company Westinghouse, which has even publicly stated that it wants to build a plant in Ukraine to produce nuclear fuel.
Some of my colleagues believe that Ukraine has the largest uranium reserves in the world. To be honest, I doubt that. But we do have very large uranium ore reserves. Still, there's a problem. The issue is that we have a type of uranium mineralization that's unusual for the rest of the world, with a low uranium content. In our ores, it's tenths or even hundredths of a percent. Meanwhile, in Canada, for example, there is a deposit called Cigar Lake, Key Lake. It's a different type, what's called an unconformity type deposit. There, the ores contain 15 to 17% U3O8.
Tell me, can we actually get rich on uranium? Or is it a bit economically unprofitable for us to mine it?
You see, at one time, we were one of the main suppliers for the Soviet Union. In Russia, their deposit base is rather weak. There's the Streltsovskoye deposit in Transbaikalia, but it's not very good. Kazakhstan supplied uranium, Uzbekistan supplied uranium. Despite the low content here, obviously it still needs to be mined, because our reserves really are large. They're classified, so I'm not going to name figures, and I don't even know the exact calculated amount. There are foreign estimates we can rely on, and they are very high.
People often say they're tired of the US, tired of Europe, that all these security guarantees don't work, and that we need to restore nuclear weapons. There are statements like that.
No, it's unrealistic, because you need very advanced technology to produce nuclear weapons. Enrichment technology. You know that uranium has to be purified to an incredibly high degree. Iran has been struggling with this nuclear weapons issue for a long time.
Is our uranium even suitable for that purpose, or is it somehow too specific?
Of course, we supplied uranium back in Soviet times, and I'm sure some of it was used to make nuclear weapons. But what's the difference? Uranium is uranium. The whole question is the level of enrichment purity.
In the last interview, you joked that we should restore nuclear weapons. That was your final line. And Oleg Horakovsky even launched a fundraiser for it.
Well, he said, come on, it's a joke. We were actually in the same place at the time when he did it. You know how they say, in every joke, there's only a grain of joking. I suggest we put an ellipsis on that, but we still have to do our own thing.
And we really will have a lot of work to do, because the Ukrainian economy is in terrible shape. In 2024, our GDP was 181 billion. In Poland, which has roughly the same population, it's 823 billion. In Romania, with 19 million people, their economy is about 350 billion. Our economy is just critically small. And by the way, a big share of even that small amount is generated right here in Kryvyi Rih.
Up to 10%. There's even a chance that as a region, we could make it into the top 5. Because Mariupol is destroyed, Zaporizhzhia is partially destroyed, and industry is basically the backbone of our economy.
Do we sell more raw materials or do we process them?
Yes, more raw material.
And why don't we process them? That's where all the money is.
Yes, that's already a certain type of production. I fully agree with you, and my view is this. It's better to add some value, so to speak. Because raw materials are, relatively speaking, the simplest and easiest way to extract and sell something. You don't actually do much. In Bissau, you just find it and sell it. But beneficiation, metallurgical production, that's already another stage. I think Ukraine needs to start thinking about no longer being just a raw material base, and about adding something on top of the raw material. Right now, the world is going through another round of turbulence. I remember back when I was a student writing my term papers and thesis. There were all these articles like, China crashes the iron ore market, and so on. Now there's a crisis in Europe. They're shutting down steel plants, and demand for ore is dropping. It turns out that in Ukraine, we kind of have it. We kind of mine it. But they've cut their purchase volumes. And then what are you going to do with it? We have to think specifically and develop the other stages of production.
I almost forgot to show you the most interesting part, how iron ore is actually extracted. If we put it briefly and spectacularly, it looks like this.
There are deposits of iron ore underground. To reach them, you have to dig a big hole, an open pit. That's what we call open pit mining, because the shafts and head frames you see, the so-called mines, that's underground extraction. Open pits are on the surface. You strip away the ground and expose the ore body. And here you can see what I was talking about, the bluer, darker layers. And over there in that corner, you see those blue streaks running through the red, that deep blue? That's ore with a high iron content, over 40%. To dig the pit, excavators like the ones you saw tear everything up. Where the rock is hard, drilling rigs are used, they drill blast holes, explosives are loaded in, there's a blast, the ground is loosened. Then excavators load it into dump trucks and the pit becomes deeper and wider. And when we hit the actual ore body, that material is loaded straight into the dump trucks and sent for beneficiation, or what's called crushing, because there are different fractions, different sizes of ore. After that, it's loaded directly into rail cars and sent to the end buyers.
Millions of tons of rock are taken out of the open pits. It's processed, part of it becomes iron. And what happens to the waste? It turns into these mountains. These are unique Kryvyi Rih mountains because they were created not by nature, but by people. They're called waste piles, rock that no longer has any value. And that's what creates these cool, otherworldly landscapes. Without American investment, we'll barely be able to extract anything here on our own because it's very expensive, the development is extremely costly. And as you already said, since Soviet times, there hasn't really been much serious exploration.
No, that's not true. Some types of mineral resources in Ukraine have been developed for more than 100 years, some for 150. For example, the iron ores of Kryvyi, or the manganese ores of the Nikopol manganese ore basin. And overall, our production is quite large. We're in the top 10 countries in the world for iron production, for manganese, for titanium, and for uranium. These technologies have long been worked out. I said that in Kazakhstan, a very large amount of uranium is now extracted from the so-called sandstone-type deposits. That's in-situ leaching, and that in-situ leaching method was first used in Ukraine. Exactly in Ukraine, at the Devladivska deposit. So, in general, we Ukrainians are not that stupid, I'll tell you.
But we actually started mining here a long time ago. This is the Kochubevsky adits. Right now, you can't get inside. Mining here started back in 1905 and ended in 1915. So yes, shale at this spot was mined a very, very long time ago. In 2016, a movie was filmed here, but now everything is abandoned. All I can really do is show you this location from a drone. The site you're looking at is the Kochubevsky adits. It's a really picturesque place. It's in Kryvyi region, and to find it in the middle of the fields, you'll have to wander around quite a bit. I saw all the photos online and was hoping we'd be able to go down into the adits. There are 5 of them, but the condition of the wooden stairs is even worse than it looks on camera. 110 years ago, business here stopped. The mine turned out to be too poor. It just wasn't profitable. Speaking of the profitability of Ukrainian resources, I've told you only about a tiny part of our critical materials. I'll have a big video about Ukrainian oil on my channel. Watch it later and subscribe so you don't miss it. It's going to be really interesting, but for some reason, everyone seriously underestimates Ukrainian gas, the same gas Russia used to constantly blackmail us with.
In recent years, you remember when Yulia Tymoshenko was prime minister, we were constantly arguing about the gas and oil we were importing. The thing is, about 20 years ago, we needed roughly 70 billion cubic meters of gas per year. We had industry, then industry slowly started to fade, new technologies began to develop, and our gas needs dropped significantly. But even now, we still need around 25 to 30 billion cubic meters. In recent years, Ukraine has been producing about 18 to 19 billion cubic meters of gas per year, sometimes 20 to 21. It wasn't always like that. In the 1960s and 70s, we were developing the Shebelinka gas field, a giant world-class field, and we were supplying gas to the entire Soviet Union. Later, those West Siberian fields were discovered, and that role faded a bit. But we have traditionally continued to produce both oil and gas in the volumes I've mentioned. Can we sharply increase production of gas and oil? Yes, we can. In 2010, there was a landmark event. For the first time, the United States overtook Russia in gas production. At that time, Russia produced around 500 billion cubic meters, and the United States about 700. Why did that happen? Because they started producing shale gas. That's a new, unconventional type of resource. And back then, in 2010 to 2014, we carried out extensive work to assess the potential for shale gas production here. And we found that we're not talking billions, we're talking trillions. There are different estimates. Some of our officials were throwing around figures of up to 50 trillion cubic meters of gas. That's not the right number. We calculated roughly 18 to 20 trillion, but there's a concept of recoverable resources. Recoverable resources are about 3 times less, so we may be talking about 5 to 7 trillion cubic meters of gas.
And how much is that in money?
It's a fantastic figure. We won't earn that much in our entire lives. So the groundwork is there, and I hope the studies we carried out in those years will still be in demand for future development. For example, before the U.S. grew so much in gas production, they drilled 20,000 wells. 20,000 wells. Just imagine. Here, around 2012 to 2013, Shell obtained a license for the Yuzivska block, right on the boundary between Donbass and the Dnipro-Donetsk depression. But they only drilled 2 wells there. They didn't produce any results. And then the war started in 2014.
You said Shell drilled 2 wells, right? So the price of one well?
Roughly $10 million.
$10 million for a single well?
And here, our wells go down 6.5 kilometers. Can you imagine how deep that is? If you just drill 200 meters, of course that costs peanuts. But as a rule, we're talking about kilometers.
When the Soviet Union collapsed, we had an exclusive contract with Russia for gas supplies. Under that deal, gas cost us about $50 per 1,000 cubic meters. It was a fixed price. It didn't change. Then, under Yulia Tymoshenko, when she took part in the negotiations and signed the new agreement, we switched that contract to a floating price, and we started paying $300, $400, even $500 per 1,000 cubic meters of gas. At one point, we were paying $12, up to a maximum of $12.5 billion a year just for imported gas. And we thought $3 billion in investment in exploration and drilling would have been enough, even taking into account that for every successful well, you need to drill 3 to 5 dry ones. $3 billion would have been completely enough to make Ukraine self-sufficient in gas. But nobody did it. And when Shell came in, Russia poured huge money into stopping the Americans from working here. What did they do? They hired grandmas, gave them posters, and told them, "Your cows will be poisoned because of shale gas." People don't understand what shale gas is. It's not some new chemical substance. It's the same regular natural gas. The Americans from Shell came in, were told to pay certain bonuses. They paid $300 million into the budget. And what other bonuses went into the budget, I don't know. Then they started getting blocked. They drilled a few exploratory wells, but that's nowhere near enough. You needed 10 to 20, even 30 billion invested just into exploration. And in their reports, you can still find them today, they estimated the reserves of the Yuzivska field at 3.6 trillion cubic meters of gas. That's more than Norway has today, and Norway is considered number 1 in Europe in terms of gas reserves.
Яка вважається там першим містом в Європі за покладами газу.
In this video, I'm not going to make any conclusions. I'll just leave you some space to think. Write in the comments which type of resource you think is the most promising for Ukraine, because over the last 30 years, we've had complete chaos. It's already clear that no one is going to take care of us except us, and we definitely can't afford to stay this weak any longer. Friends, support this content, like this video, and stay with us. Subscribe to the PEICHEV channel.